Welcome back to the E30 project. In the last few videos, we did some maintenance on the drum brakes, sprayed our new front calipers, and took all these new brake parts and installed them on the front. In this episode, we'll be bleeding all the brake fluid, front and rear. This is the brake fluid reservoir. When you step on the brake pedal, fluid is pumped from this reservoir to the brakes, clamping the brake rotor or drums and thus stopping the car. There is a minimum and maximum level indicated on this reservoir. We'll bleed the brakes starting from the brake that is furthest from the reservoir, so that as we move from brake to brake, the dirty old fluid doesn't get sent from one brake to the next. So here's the reservoir in the engine bay, and the furthest brake will be the rear right brake, followed by the rear left, the front right, and then the closest and last will be the front left. So here's some fresh new .4 brake fluid. We want to use fresh new fluid because fluid that's been opened will absorb the water from the air, and when you have water in your brake fluid, it can boil, turn into gas, and then your brakes don't work. Before we bleed the fluid, we'll want to top up the reservoir so that as you bleed the fluid and the fluid comes out of your brake system, your reservoir doesn't go empty and suck in more air, because that's the whole point why we are bleeding the brake system, to get any air out of the system as well as the dirty old fluid. So we'll use a clean towel, wipe off all the area around the reservoir. Then you can open the cap to the reservoir, and in case the cap is dripping any brake fluid, you'll want to put a cloth underneath it. Brake fluid, if it gets on painted areas and you don't wipe it off, will eventually cause the paint to discolor or come off. Now with some help from a funnel, I can pour in the new .4 brake fluid. Slowly pour it in so it doesn't spill out, and keep going until the level in the reservoir reaches the max level. With the reservoir topped off, we can now finally start to bleed the brakes, starting with the rear right brake. Okay, so now we've got the wheel off, and there's not a lot of equipment we need in order to bleed the brakes. So one thing we need is a hose which will fit over the bleed nipple on the brake caliper or brake drum, and a little container that the hose will go into. Okay, so here we are underneath and behind the brake drum, and this is the brake fluid coming in. This is the hard line, and above it, this guy here, that's the bleed nipple with a little rubber cover on it. So just pull the cover off, and that's the bleed nipple. That's what our hose will go over. So just slide the hose onto the nipple, and then we will crack open the bleed screw. It's better to use a proper flare nut wrench or even a basic wrench or spanner here, but this was a really small bleed nipple and I didn't have anything smaller than 8 mm, so I think this was like a 6 or a 7 mm. With the bleed nipple loosened, if you step on the brake pedal, you should see the brake fluid start flowing out. If it doesn't, then you just need to loosen the bleed nipple a bit more. You might get a lot of bubbles coming out of your brakes, like this one. You'll want to keep pumping until there are no more bubbles. If you filled up the bottle with new brake fluid, it does help to prevent the air that you just pumped out from getting sucked back into the brakes. Just keep pumping the brake pedal until you see the brake fluid start to get clearer and lighter. That's the new brake fluid we just poured in. When the brake fluid comes out clear and there are also no more air bubbles, then you're done with this brake, and you can re-tighten the bleed nipple, remove the hose, and move on to the next brake. Oh, and don't forget to just wipe down or clean off the area around the bleed nipple, and also reinsert the cap. After bleeding each brake, you will notice that the fluid level in the reservoir has dropped. So just make sure you top it up from time to time and don't let the reservoir run empty. Otherwise you start pumping air through the system again and you have to bleed everything all over again. After bleeding both the rear drum brakes, it's time to move on to the front disc brakes. These are much more accessible, but they are a bit higher up, so make sure that your bottle and your bleed hose is higher than the bleed nipple. That way any air will come out of the bleed nipple and stay in the hose instead of going back up into the brake system. For this brake, there was a lot of bubbles as soon as I started bleeding it. And here you can see that's a bubble going upwards away from the caliper because our hose is higher than the bleed nipple. As before, pump the brakes until the fluid comes out clear and without any bubbles. Then you can tighten the bleed nipple, remove the hose, clean up the area, recap the bleed nipple, and you're done. When you're done with all 4 brakes, make sure to top up the brake fluid level in the reservoir again. And then you can put your wheels on and that's it. Job well done. If this video helped you, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Bye.